We always talk about being single as if it were the absence of something. The chapter of your life where you're still waiting for the real stuff to begin, or proof that nothing has worked out yet, meaning that you're flawed. But the people who have stayed single the longest are very often the people who know themselves the best, and that pattern only makes sense if singleness is doing something to them that being in a relationship never could. So what is the time alone actually for? And how can you avoid throwing your life away during that time instead of pursuing the things that are good for you? There's a pattern you can verify yourself by paying attention to the people in your own life. Take two people who have been single for roughly the same time, 5 years, 8 years, whatever the number. Just look at who they are at the end of it. One of them has become someone. Their judgment is sharp, their taste is specific, they have hobbies, they like things, they walk into a room and you can feel the charisma of the person they've spent that time building. They've improved themselves using that single time and become a different person. The other one has gone through the same number of years spent single and has come out anxious, has come out angry, hungry for validation. The experience is identical, but the output is the opposite. But why? If solo time is just absence, then years of it should affect two people roughly the same way, but it clearly doesn't. Something else is happening inside that time, and until we figure out what that something is, the people passing that time well will keep being read by the rest of us as exceptions to the rule, where they could be evidence for how to actually improve ourselves. The answer starts with what relationships do that nobody warns you about. When two people have been together for a long time, something happens to the way that each of them functions individually. Psychologists call it shared cognitive load. The two brains start to run together as one extended system. You remember different things than your partner does because together you're remembering everything between you two. Whole categories of emotional regulation and decision-making redistribute across the couple without anyone noticing it happening. You each specialize in different things, remember the same thing slightly differently. You complement each other. At least that's what it's supposed to look like. So this all sounds romantic, and most of the time it is. The merging and the cooperation is what makes a real relationship sound and feel like a real partnership. You finish each other's thoughts, you operate as a unit, you really complement each action and thought and behavior of the other person. The friction of being two separate operating systems slowly disappears, replaced by something smoother and more efficient. Think of the popular phenomenon of asking someone where they want to eat, and their answer is always, I don't know. But when you suggest a place, the answer is always, no. That's the shared cognitive load in action, because one person slowly became used to their partner always picking for them. You always decide, so I don't have anything in mind, I just know that I can't suggest anything, but if you suggest something, I don't know. Your partner quietly takes parts of you off of your plate and puts it onto theirs, and shares some of their stuff with you. And those parts of you stop growing because there's nothing left for it to do because someone else is handling it. To run as one single system, you had to give up running as two independent systems. The parts of you that the relationship is now handling, the emotional regulation and the decision-making, are parts of you that stop developing on their own for you because they don't need to do that anymore. They're working for two. The partnership is taking care of that. A single person can't split anything with anyone. They can't have someone else think certain thoughts for them. Every decision is theirs to make alone. That doesn't mean that they make those decisions or make them well, but it's that individual's responsibility. Every feeling, every action is theirs to handle alone. So those parts of them stay alive and keep getting used, in the best case scenario, that is. So after 5 years of doing all of this alone, those parts are stronger. You're exercising them, you're making decisions and doing things for yourself by yourself. After 8 years, they're even stronger. The single person who has been single for a long time knows what they want for dinner without thinking about it, and knows how to handle a bad day on their own, because that's just what they do. If it comes your way, you handle it. It's just what happens when you have to do all of it yourself. The same thing happens with bigger moves. If you're in a relationship and you want to take a job in a new city, that's not your decision alone. You can't just go ahead and do it like you do things when you're single. You have to work with your partner. You have to compromise. You have to have this conversation. Your partner has feelings about it, and you have to really prove that it's the right choice. A single person doesn't have to have that conversation, doesn't have that challenge. They just take the job, or not. Or they just leave the job they hate without asking anyone. They don't need someone else to give permission. Multiply that across hundreds or thousands of decisions across 5 or 10 or whatever years, and the difference really adds up. You're really sharing a lot of the load with the other person and really thinking about everything you're doing from the other person's perspective. The single person's life points where they pointed it. but a couple works together. It really behaves differently. So this is what that time is doing, the time together or the time apart. The story we tell ourselves is that the single years are nothing. The single years are when you build the parts of yourself that a relationship would have taken over. You just have to build yourself up enough that once you're in that relationship, you no longer need to grow. The person who comes out of the other end of 5 years single has been doing this work for 5 years, in that best case scenario. The coupled version of themselves hasn't. And that's the whole difference. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to grow, but that the scenario you're placed in these two different types of relationships, one with yourself and one with another person, just contribute different things. The time alone is seemingly where all that work happens, all that self-development. Now, there is an important counterpoint to make. A supportive partner would always support decisions made that are best for the other person and for the couple together, and I'll talk about that point shortly. First, we have to talk about actual research on the topic. Let me back up some of this with science, shall I? In 1988, a British psychiatrist named Anthony Storr wrote a book called Solitude. His argument was simple. Our entire field, he said, had been treating intimate relationships as the only path to mental health. But if you actually look at the lives of the most psychologically developed people in history, almost all of them had long stretches of solitude, and that solitude was the condition under which they became themselves. Storr wasn't writing about being single specifically, but he was writing about something much bigger than that. Time alone has its own value, and our culture has decided to treat it as kind of a problem. Esther Buchholz built on this in the 90s. She studied what she called alone time and found that the people who got serious chunks of it produced sharper creative work and ended up with clearer senses of what they wanted out of their own lives. More recently, Toivi Nguyen, I probably butchered that name, sorry, at the University of Durham has been running controlled studies on solitude. Her finding is that the chosen time alone reduces stress and lets the nervous system reset in a way that being around people simply doesn't. Then there's the marriage data. Everyone's heard the line that married people are happier and live longer, if they're not part of the 50% that gets divorced. And yeah, that data exists, but most of the gap really disappears once you take into account who actually gets married in the first place. The people who would have been happier and healthier anyway are also the people more likely to find a partner in the first place and get married. Once you account for that, the so-called marriage advantage shrinks to almost nothing. Researchers like Bella DePaulo have spent 20 years making this point and being ignored because the cultural script wants the data to mean what it doesn't actually mean. It has to try to force on you this idea that being married and having a partner is the only directive in life, that you need to get married, you need to have kids, and that's the whole point of it all. But that's not really the case, is it? There's one more finding worth knowing. Another study, a 2016 study by Sarkeesian and Gerstel, looked at the social networks of married versus single people and found, against every cultural assumption, that singles are more connected. They see their parents more often and have closer friendships. They invest more in their neighbors and communities. Married couples tend to spend most of their time with each other and stop investing in other relationships. They already have their best friend, hopefully, right next to them, so why go out and try to make friends with other people that could challenge that relationship? Singles keep those other relationships strong and get their sociality from those friends. The lonely single is mostly a story that we tell. It is true a lot of the time that individuals who are by themselves and single are lonely, but hey, it's also true that people who are married or in partnerships can also be very lonely. The well-connected single is really what the data shows. But it's also not true for everyone. Again, statistics, not an absolute case. So, back to the question we've asked before. Are relationships ultimately a bad thing? I would not say that, no, not even close. The time alone only does the work if you actually do the work. Being single is not magic. You don't become a better person just by being by yourself. You can spend 10 years single and emerge less developed than the friend who spent the same decade coupled, if you spent those 10 years avoiding yourself and stuffing your face with distractions instead of facing your own insecurities and improving yourself. Look at what the avoidant version of single actually looks like. Every night ends with a phone in hand, scrolling until sleep, distraction after distraction. Every weekend gets filled with plans or video games because an empty Saturday makes you feel sick and it makes you feel like you have to face yourself. The quiet stretches get killed with drink or drugs or playing video games or watching movies, just endless distractions in general, really, just so you don't have to look inside yourself. The single person doing this is alone in the technical sense and never alone in the real sense because they've arranged their entire life around not having to sit with themselves. After 8 years of that, they've not built any of the things this video has been describing. The benefits of being single are not automatic. This individual is not sharper, they can't handle a bad day on their own, they still get frustrated, they still get angry, they still have all those same problems because they haven't chosen to work on themselves. They've just learned how to fill that time with noise. They've just learned how to shove their loneliness down and replace it with other things that they can focus on. Being in a couple will always beat that, right? The advantage of being single belongs to the people who actually face the time and look at themselves and say, hey, I want to be a better person, so ultimately I probably could be in a relationship. Whereas if someone spends that time alone and doesn't do any of the self-improvement, there's no point in being in a relationship after that because you're the same person you were at the beginning. The people running from this don't get any of it. If you've been single for years and you don't recognize yourself in anything I've just been describing, this is probably why. The time was there, you were just not in it. You weren't aware, you weren't present. So does that mean that it's bad to want a relationship in the first place? Well, no, not that either. But before I answer that for real, there's also a different kind of cost that I haven't talked about yet, one that has nothing to do with avoidance per se, but I'll get to that soon. The argument we've been making is that the person who has done the alone work shows up to the next relationship, if they choose to be in one, as someone real, as someone better than before. And that part is true. What's also true is that the longer you spend on that work, the harder you are to pair with, and the idea is that if you went through all of that improvement by yourself, you haven't been developing yourself along with another person. Look at couples who got together at 20 years old and then stayed together for 40, 50, 60 years. A lot of them didn't have strong selves when they met, they weren't an amazing self-developed person, but that's also exactly why they could stay together. Two soft, half-formed people can shape themselves around each other and build a shared identity from scratch. Even if they're both not amazing people who have gone through all this development, they go through that over time together. So eventually their preferences merge because there were no strong preferences to begin with. They were half-formed. Their tastes grow together, their appreciations. Conflict can stay low because they never had those sharp, hard edges grinding against each other after they've developed by themselves individually for all that time. Now, for instance, picture two people meeting at 35, after plenty of time alone to improve or develop themselves. Both of these individuals spent the last decade single and doing that work. By the time they meet, both of them have very specific and sharp preferences and tastes. Their deal breakers have been refined over 1,000 small decisions made without anyone else in the room. They know who they are and what they want. They're exactly who they want to be, which also makes it harder to make any compromises. At 16, someone offers you alcohol and you try it. At 35, you have an entire worldview about people who drink a lot, and they have an entire worldview about you, and you've developed this worldview over a lot of experience viewing the world and forming opinions. Multiply that across thousands of micro preferences, and the math gets ugly. So there is definitely a sweet spot. Single long enough that you actually know yourself and know some of your preferences and what to go for and how to be a good person at least, but not so long that knowing yourself becomes a fortress and you solidify all your preferences, appreciations, and personality traits so that you have only this type of person you could match with. The whole point is to do the work on yourself and then carry it forward so that you can work alongside the other person together, not to stay alone so long that the carrying becomes impossible and the development alongside someone else becomes stagnant and kind of too impossible as well. But how do you really know when you've done enough, when you've developed yourself to that point, right? I'll answer that in a bit, but first we have to get back to the question if it were actually a bad thing to want a relationship in the first place. Because do you want someone for the right reasons? And even if you don't, is that okay? The obvious answer is no, it's not a bad thing to want a relationship, even if your reasons are mostly physical. It's part of nature, it's part of humanity. The work you do alone is the thing that makes it all possible, which we've talked about countless times on this channel already, but it doesn't mean that it's probable, but you really have to get there on your own. Being in a relationship can be bad when you don't develop your own tastes and you don't develop yourself, which doesn't have to be the case. It really just depends on you and your experiences. But if it is the case, and if something happens and the relationship ends, you can become a mess in your mid-30s. You can fall apart. The work that should have been done at 23 and before has to be done at 38, with much higher stakes and with a much higher chance that you won't find a partner at all and will spend a lot more time really afraid and angry at yourself and at the world. People call this a midlife crisis. Even when an individual is in a relationship, this kind of thing can happen. Most of the time, though, it's this alone chapter showing up late and demanding to be lived through before you can even have a healthy relationship. You have to do that work by yourself earlier on so that you can spend the later years developing with that other person, right? The single person who is doing the work right now arrives at their next relationship already finished. Well, not finished, they still have plenty of growing to do, but you get it. This person knows what they want, they know what they can't accept and what they prefer, and they don't need a partner to complete that self that was never built, but they still have plenty of room to grow. They show up to this relationship more whole, and that is the only way that you can actually be loved for who you truly are. The first thing to do is the most obvious and also the hardest. Spend real time alone, but also work on yourself during that time. Real time alone means stillness. It means spending time with yourself. Quit scrolling and watching porn and using all of these distractions to remove yourself from yourself. Just you in a room with your own thoughts. Meditating, maybe, or not even. Just think. Just think. Most people call this boring, which it can be, but that's exactly why it works. The boredom is the work and is the consequence of spending that time with yourself, and maybe you'll get over it, maybe you won't, but the discomfort is part of the work and something you also need to get over in order to spend some more time with yourself. It's also possible to be bored with another person, but you can't just fill all of your time with excitement and drama. That's not healthy either. When you sit through a quiet evening without feeling it, the parts of you we've been talking about start to wake up more. When you don't, they just keep sleeping and they're undeveloped. There's no shortcut here. Either you put the phone down for some real chunks of time every week by yourself, or none of this is going to happen. Your self-development doesn't automatically happen. Some of it definitely does in the background, but you have to think. You have to spend time by yourself in order to develop. The second thing is to make decisions in your own voice, to develop your own voice. Stop texting 4 friends to find out what you should do about something only you can decide. Don't rely on other people's opinions. The polling is the same outsourcing move that we talked about in long relationships, just spread across a wider group. You're getting the ideas and the opinions from more people. Every time you ask someone else to make a small decision for you, the muscle that should be making it gets weaker. Pick the restaurant, pick the apartment, tell me what color I should wear. Even when you pick wrong or pick something that you ultimately decide you didn't prefer in the first place, the picking itself is what you're building. It doesn't matter if you like it or not, you have to pick, you have to choose. I'd argue picking wrong is still better than picking something that you're unsure of or dislike later. Then at least you've experienced it and you understand, and then you find out that it's not for you, and then you can move on with those new insights and try something else that's new. The third thing is to actually move when you want to move, to do things based on what you've learned. The unfair advantage that you have right now is that you can actually make those changes without negotiating with another person. You're by yourself, so any consequences fall on your shoulders. That advantage is wasted if you sit on it, if you don't take those chances, if you don't try to learn things about yourself. If you want to take that job in another city, take it. If you want to spend a weekend doing something nobody else would want to do it. The coordination doesn't apply to you right now. You don't have to worry about someone else telling you what they do or do not want you to do. Most coupled people would probably trade real money for that freedom you currently have at no cost. But that's also a consequence of being in a couple. Ups and downs, right? The fourth thing is to stop trying to fix being single. You can't spend that whole time chasing while you're also figuring out how to improve yourself. There are milestones for sure, but the whole framing is the problem. The time you spend treating singleness as the problem itself is the time that you're not spending inside of it purposely. If you've got 6 months or 6 years left of being single, those months or years are doing the work whether you participate or not, but you should really spend that time purposefully. Spending that time as a single person, knowing you're single, and then ultimately you can choose to pursue a relationship. But if you're going to be single, do it with purpose. The only choice you have ultimately is whether you're present for that amount of time. Which leaves one last question, or at least the only question left in this video. You can ask any other questions down in the comments below. But this is one we've deferred earlier. How do you actually know when that time has done its job and you're ready to pursue a relationship? Well, there are a few signs to watch for. The first one is pretty small, but it's when an empty Saturday or spending time by yourself no longer scares you, when you're satisfied being with yourself. You can sit with the quiet and you don't feel the need to fix it. Another sign is that you can articulate what you actually want from your partner in this clear, short answer, and you know exactly what it is. You're not making a wish list or anything, you're not having this string of deal breakers, but you do have preferences and you do know them. The biggest sign, though, is that when you imagine staying single forever, you kind of feel calm about it. It's not the worst thing in the world to be single because at this point, you've learned to like yourself. And this last one is kind of the real test to whether or not you can actually be in a relationship. You can only choose to be in a relationship if you appreciate yourself and if you're also able to choose not to be in a relationship. Until you can sit with the possibility of staying alone, every relationship you enter will partly be an escape from that fear and will partly be just a series of compromises and interactions that aren't really what a relationship should be about. So when these signs are true, the chapter has done its job. The next part of your life can start when you're open to it. So, the answer to the question this video opened with, what you're doing during those years that you call empty or being single, is building the parts of yourself that make that real life possible, whether it's by yourself or with another person. The people you know who came out of those long single stretches as deeper versions of themselves didn't get lucky. They didn't end up with a partner who was a beautiful, gorgeous, amazing person just by accident. They paid attention to what the time was doing, they paid attention to themselves, and they let time do its job. They worked on themselves over that extended period and eventually chose to pursue a relationship. The framing and the culture that you came into this with treats being single as absence, as just the stepping stone to the next part of life where you're going to be in a relationship and you just need to spend the time alone before that happens. But that's not the right way to view things. The years that you spend single are years that your tastes, your judgment, your ability to handle yourself, your ability to choose things, to develop, to figure out what your preferences are all important. And these are all being built with no one else in the room to absorb that work or to quote unquote get in the way. If you ignore this time alone and run from the time and try to distract yourself, you come out smaller, you come out less interesting. If you face the time, if you face the boredom, you eventually come out as a more complete person who loves themselves more and is more able to love another person. So how do you make sure that you're not wasting your time spent single? So is that a bad thing? You get a lot of it in return in other ways, so we'll get back to that shortly. First, we have to look at the downside of it. So if you're single right now, here's what you can actually do with the time. That's what the time is for. Whether you let that time do the work is the only thing that has ever been up to you. If you want to make sure that you make the most of it, figure out why loneliness leads to connection by clicking on this video next. Like, subscribe, etc., etc. We'll see you there. Peace.